World War II, a war that consumed nations, reshaped continents, and left behind a legacy of fire and ash. But beneath the chaos, beneath the thunder of artillery and the roar of bombers, there existed another kind of battle, a war of shadows, a war of deception, a war fought not with bullets, but with imagination. This is the story of the Ghost Army, a secret American unit that turned art into a weapon and fooled German forces using illusions so realistic, they changed the course of the war itself. By 1944, Europe was still burning. D-Day had come and gone, but victory was far from certain. The Allied forces had landed in Normandy, but every mile they gained was paid for with blood. The Germans were desperate, fortified, and unpredictable. To win, the Allies needed something new, something the enemy could never expect. Not more guns, not more tanks, but deception. So, the U.S. military created a unit unlike anything before, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were a ghost army, an invisible force of artists, designers, sound engineers, and dreamers tasked with one impossible mission: to fool the German war machine. Unlike any other unit in history, these men came not from boot camps, but from art schools, studios, and theaters. They were painters, sculptors, actors, sound technicians, and set designers. Men who once painted billboards and designed stage lights, now drafted into a war of illusion. Names like Bill Blass, who would later become a world-famous fashion designer, and Ellsworth Kelly, who would redefine modern art after the war. They were young, creative, and fearless. But most importantly, they believed that deception could save lives. Their tools: paint, canvas, rubber, and sound. Their goal: to make the Germans believe that the U.S. Army was somewhere it wasn't, while the real army prepared to strike somewhere else. The Ghost Army had no tanks, at least not real ones. Instead, they had inflatable tanks, rubber Shermans, life-sized and realistic enough to fool enemy reconnaissance from miles away. They could inflate a full division, hundreds of tanks, trucks, and artillery, in just a few hours. From the sky, it looked like an unstoppable force. On the ground, it was just air and paint. They didn't just fake tanks. They built entire camps, tents, fake headquarters, dummy radio towers, and painted vehicles with false insignias. Soldiers posed as generals, walked through towns giving orders, and acted like real officers. Every move, every sound, every conversation, choreographed to sell the illusion, and perhaps their most powerful weapon of all, was sound. Hollywood had joined the war. Engineers from Bell Labs and the movie industry recorded the rumble of tanks, the clatter of machinery, and the march of boots on dirt. These sounds were pressed onto massive records, played through speakers so powerful they could be heard 15 miles away. In the darkness of night, a few dozen Ghost Army soldiers could sound like thousands. German scouts would report entire divisions moving into position, never realizing it was a carefully designed lie. Sound deception became one of the most effective psychological weapons of the entire war. August 1944. France. The real U.S. forces were preparing to take the city of Brest, a fortress on the Atlantic coast. To help them, the Ghost Army was deployed. They set up hundreds of inflatable tanks and artillery near the front lines, mimicking a full armored division. From the air, it looked like an invasion force ready to strike. German scouts saw the illusion, and they believed it. The Germans redirected troops and artillery toward the decoy, leaving the real forces free to advance from another direction. The deception worked perfectly. A few dozen men, with the rubber tanks and sound effects, had altered the course of a battle. Every mission was dangerous. The Ghost Army operated just miles from enemy lines, often under real fire. If captured, they would not be treated as prisoners of war. They were spies, and the penalty for espionage was death. Yet, despite the risk, they kept going. They drove trucks painted with fake division logos, They forged radio transmissions that mimicked real military chatter. They built entire fake units that existed only on paper and in the minds of German intelligence officers. One member later said, "We were pretending to be a 30,000-man army, while the real one was miles away. If the Germans attacked, we were finished." But they weren't finished. They succeeded, again and again. March 1945. The war was nearing its end, but one final challenge remained. The Allies needed to cross the Rhine River into Germany. If the Nazis discovered where that crossing would take place, it could lead to a massacre. So, the Ghost Army staged their most elaborate illusion. They pretended to be the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions setting up fake camps 30 miles south of the real crossing point. They created fake radio traffic. They blasted tank sounds through speakers. They moved inflatable convoys under a cover of night. Everything about the operation screamed real, and the Germans took the bait. They shifted artillery and reinforcements south, leaving the actual crossing point nearly unguarded. The real U.S. Ninth Army crossed the Rhine successfully. Thousands of lives were saved because of a lie. When the war ended in 1945, the Ghost Army disappeared into the shadows once again. Their missions were classified, their names erased from official history. For decades, no one spoke of them. Their families didn't know what they had done. Their commanders never mentioned their role. It wasn't until the 1990s, almost 50 years later, that their story was finally revealed. Documents were declassified, photographs surfaced, and the world discovered that the most creative minds of a generation had helped win a world war, not with weapons, but with deception. In 2022, nearly 8 decades after their final mission, the U.S. Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, a long overdue recognition for the men who turned art into a shield and saved countless lives through illusion. They had risked everything. They had fought without killing. They had deceived to protect. In the words of one of their members, "We were soldiers, but we painted, we built, we designed, we created, and somehow, through all of it, we helped end the war." The Ghost Army stands as a reminder of something profound, that creativity can be as powerful as any weapon. That imagination, when guided by courage, can shape the outcome of history. They fought not for glory, but for peace. And though their battles were made of rubber and sound, their impact was as real as any bullet fired on the front lines. They were artists who went to war, and one this was the Ghost Army.